Hi, I'm Chris Morris, and I'm here to announce that the status quo is not okay. Here are 3 areas to address immediately in education. Number 1, the failure is not an option mindset, so prevalent in today's schools. In reality, failure is absolutely necessary to achieve real success in life. You learn some of your best lessons. It's your best teacher. You finally come to the end of yourself and learn to go a different direction and make corrective, beneficial decisions that opens up a future for you. And we're robbing this generation of the opportunity to learn from it, its best teacher. Just this past week, a local teacher in Florida was fired because she refused to give credit to students for turning in nothing. That's right. To actually give them what they had earned got her fired. This cannot stand. I think Simon Sinek said it best in his viral video that went out about millennials in the workplace. And he said, right now, for the first time in history, we have a generation who's gone through high school, made it to college, and finally started work at their first entry-level jobs. And their whole worlds are shattered because all of a sudden, they're not special. By the way, mom can't get them a promotion. You get nothing for coming in last, and you can't just have it because you want it. Well, right now, we're showing kids in the state of Florida that just because you want it, you can have it. And doing nothing can still get you half credit. And we're not showing and actually doing the job of teaching skills that are real, that can be utilized to benefit their future when they enter on the real world past high school and college. This is an atrocity of gigantic proportion. I can't even begin to get started and unpack it to the level it needs to. Guys, the failure is not an option mindset is destroying our kids, and it's got to stop. First, we need to stop passing kids on to the next grade just because we are forced to because of graduation rates. That has to deal with funding, and I'll get into that later in the video. But right now, let's move on to part 2 of what areas need to be fixed immediately in education. Standardized testing. The failing testing, standardized testing structure that is currently just absolutely wrecking our schools. It's a yoke around the necks of our teachers and our students. Teachers are terrified every single year and worried about how the kids are going to perform. And the worst thing is, after the implementation of Common Core, a lot of the testing processes that have been set up haven't even themselves, I'm convinced, figured out how to actually test Common Core. And one state in particular, one I'm very familiar with, it's been 3 years and they have yet to have a successful campaign of this new testing, standardized testing system that's been set up for the kids to take. The first year there were glitches and they ended up not counting the scores. Year number 2, they tried to do these computer tests to actually assess these kids. Had to pull out kids 3 separate times throughout the year to get them in computer labs to take these tests, and there were glitches, the system shut down, the kids weren't finishing in time, and it was such a disaster that the commissioner of the state towards around April or May, towards the end of the school year, ended up firing the test book company or the testing company that implemented, was responsible for these testing measures, and ended up switching to a paper pencil test. Well, what's funny is, after you get fired from a job, do you really feel like you're going to do any more work for those people that fired you? This textbook company had all these paper tests that were sent to them, and it was the textbook company, or the testing company, that was in charge with actually grading these tests and getting them back to the teachers to reflect on the kids' grades. Do you think if they got fired that they were actually going to take the time to grade all these handwritten tests? I have no idea where they got the data that year to actually say, hey, this is what your level of effectiveness is, teacher. This is what your score was, kid. I really don't know where that came from because the testing company was fired. This is a disaster. This past school year alone in that same state, there were so many glitches, there were hackers, bugs. Some of the testing reporting got attributed to the wrong kids. So the bottom line is the actual testing results from this past school year were actually non-factual. They were fake. They're not to be trusted. And it was so bad that the General Assembly of that state actually passed legislation earlier this year saying, and I quote, no adverse action can be held accountable against the teachers and students because the test was so unreliable. But don't you know, just like tends to be the case. The Department of Education just recently, in the last week alone, sent an email out to all the teachers in this state saying if they chose not to count this faulty test score as part of their level of effectiveness, then they were going to be denied access to find out what their scores are. So in one side of their mouth, they're saying, hey, no, don't worry about it. We won't put any adverse action on you as a result of these faulty test scores. And on the other side of that coin, they're saying, but if you do choose to exercise that right we're giving you, we're going to. This is wrong, and it can't stand. This is destroying this generation. It's just getting good teachers to want to leave the system and no longer feel like what they're doing is worth it because they're not actually teaching. They're doing something else entirely. The last thing I want to touch on, and the third thing that is a big problem in our educational setting, is funding. You could almost put funding as an umbrella over the other two problems that we see today in education, being failure is not an option and also the testing strategies. The funding is ridiculous. When it comes to failure, did you know that in our schools, a vast majority of them will lose funding unless they're able to keep graduation rates at a certain percentage? So translation, school personnel is highly incentivized to make sure kids are passing each grade and getting their diploma at the end of every single senior year, which means people who really should not have been passed on were passed along. People who probably had true 40s and 50s as their school year average were probably magically turned into 70s and passing by the end of the school year because they're going to lose funding if they don't play ball, if they don't figure out a way to make it on paper that they've passed. This is a big problem. If you want to fix this problem, change the way funding is allocated in our school districts. Don't tie funding to graduation rates. It just sets up situations to be untruthful and unethical. Also, the testing companies are making out like bandits right now. They're putting together an inferior product that isn't tested. If you actually want to see something that's kind of funny, I'll give you the definition of what test is. Test, and I quote from Google, it says a procedure intended to establish the quality, performance, or reliability of something, especially before it is taken into a widespread use. I'm convinced that the testing companies are putting out a product that itself hasn't been tested, but telling us that it will do the job of testing our students. What a load of crock. For 3 years, you still haven't gotten it right, yet we're supposed to put our futures, put our kids' futures, put the teachers' professional, stance on these faulty test scores? I don't think so. There's a big problem. And what's amazing to me is that these testing companies who actually get paid upwards of $40, $50 million in some cases to do and become the official testing company for these states are making out like bandits, getting paid millions of dollars up front. And when they get fired, they're still getting every penny of that profit. It's so corrupt to me. And we can't continue to ignore the obvious, the elephant in the room, if you will, and wonder why things are the way they are. It's time to make a change. So let's look at our testing, standardized testing measures, and let's scrap it. Let's make it about relationship. Let's make it about equipping teachers with the tools to actually show and reflect love to their kids so that they can become a source of influence and actually be able to direct them towards a future for themselves. And let's look at the funding, how we're allocating it, and the systems that are in place, and let's change just how people get money in the first place. That'll change a lot. And also, let's change this whole mindset behind failure is not an option. Let's let them learn from their mistakes so that they can make corrective action that actually brings life towards the kids and gives them a future. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you found it of value, please share. My name is Chris Morris, Morrissey Model. We do educational consulting, public speaking, and recently we're going to have a new book. It's called Love Changed It All. It's a teacher's story about how to reflect love towards kids and how that draws out the best of them. So anyway, I hope you enjoyed this. Please share if you know me or if you find it to be something that's worth a message that's worth sharing. And have a great day.